Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We are covering 4 verses today in the 10th canto, 15th chapter. We'll be going over 36, 37, 38, and 39, 3 of which have small purports. And so I've been told that I'm to read the Sanskrit and English translations and purports for the 3 initial verses. And then we'll all recite the 4th verse together. Tata Krishnam cha Ramam cha. Let me say that again, because apparently you all don't speak English. We're going over 4 verses, and what I've been instructed to do is to read the first 4 verses without, the first 3 verses without you repeating. And I'm going to read the Sanskrit and English and the translation and the purport. Then on the 4th verse, we'll do what we normally do in the Bhagavatam class, where we do the call and response. Tata Krishnam cha Ramam cha gyataya denukasya ye Kṛṣṭaro bhyadravānsave samrabdhaha bandavaha. Translation: the other ass demons, close friends of Dhenukasur, were enraged upon seeing his death, and thus they all immediately ran to attack Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma. Tangstan apatata Kṛṣṇo Ramascha nripa līlaya grihita paschach charanam prahinot trina rajasu. O king, as the demons attacked, Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma easily seized them one after another by their hind legs and threw them all into the tops of the palm trees. Well, I blew it as well because I forgot to read the purport to the first verse, which I'm going to do now. Purport. Śrīla Sanātana Gosvāmī makes the following comment on this verse. It's stated here that the ass demons were first attacked Kṛṣṇa and then Balarāma. Krishnam cha Ramam cha. One reason for this is that the demons, having seen the prowess of Balarāma, thought it wise to attack Kṛṣṇa first. Or it may be that out of affection for his elder brother, Lord Kṛṣṇa placed himself between Balarāma and the ass demons. The words Krishnam cha Ramam cha may also be understood to indicate that Lord Balarāma, out of affection for his younger brother, went to Lord Kṛṣṇa's side. Then jumping up to text 38. Pala prakara sankirnam daitya dehar gatasubihi raraja bhu satalagrer ghanar eva nabhastalam. Translation: the earth then appeared beautifully covered with heaps of fruits and with the dead bodies of the demons, which were entangled in the broken tops of the palm trees. Indeed, the earth shone like the sky decorated with clouds. Purport. According to Śrīla Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, The bodies of the demons were dark, like dark blue clouds, and a large quantity of blood that flowed from their bodies appeared like bright red clouds. Thus the whole scene was very beautiful. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his various forms, such as Ram and Krishna, is always transcendental. And when he enacts his transcendental pastimes, the result is always blissful and transcendental, even when the Lord performs violent acts like killing the stubborn ass demons. And now we're on text 39, which we'll do in a call and response fashion. Tayoḥ su-mahat karma, niśamya vibudha-ādayaḥ, mumucuḥ puṣpa-varṣāṇi, cakrur vādyāni tuṣṭuvuḥ. Tayoḥ su-mahat karma, niśamya vibudha-ādayaḥ, mumucuḥ puṣpa-varṣāṇi, vādyāni tuṣṭuvuḥ.
Tayoḥ su-mahat karma,
Tayoḥ su-mahat karma,
niśamya vibudha-ādayaḥ, mumucuḥ puṣpa-varṣāṇi, cakrur vādyāni tuṣṭuvuḥ.
Mataji's. Mumucuḥ puṣpa-varṣāṇi, tayoḥ of the two brothers, tat, that, su-mahat, very great, karma, act, niśamya, hearing of, vibudha-ādayaḥ, the demigods and other elevated living beings. Mumucuḥ, they released. Puṣpa-varṣāṇi, downpours of flowers. Cakruḥ, they performed. Vādyāni, music. Tuṣṭuvuḥ, they offered prayers. Translation. Hearing of this magnificent feat of the two brothers, the demigods and other elevated living beings rained down flowers and offered music and prayers in glorification. Purport. Śrīla Sanātana Gosvāmī comments that the demigods, great sages, and other exalted beings were all astonished and ecstatic upon seeing the unusually swift and nonchalant way in which Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma killed the very powerful ass demons in the Tāla forest. Śrīla Prabhupada ki. Although this is not Śrīla Prabhupada's translation and purport, we get to say Śrīla Prabhupada ki anytime we want to. Well, generally, I lecture about 300 plus times a year. 6 days a week is my average, never less than 5, and sometimes as many as 8 or 9 times in a given week. As such, I almost never prepare for lectures. I like to be spontaneous and creative and artistic, and I find that just my regular study primes me to go out there and paint pictures. It doesn't always work out, but that's the way I like to do things. Probably, I was thinking about it just on the way over here, I prepare for lectures less than 1% of the time. So maybe once, twice, not more than thrice in a given year, I'll sit down and prepare a lecture. I did that yesterday. I spent heaps of time preparing my lecture, and it's not because this crowd here is particularly large, although I don't know how far-reaching we are. It's because we are in Sri Vrindavan Dham. We're talking about the Dashama Skanda of the Bhagavatam. We're deep in Krishna Lila in Vrindavan. This is the Garbha Griha, the Sanctum Sanctorum, the holiest of holies for the whole world and for the whole world of ISKCON. And so I'm just intimidated, and I wanted to, so we'll see if it works out or not. Sometimes, like I said, maybe preparing isn't my friend, but we'll see what happens. And to add to my anxiety, not only are there elders listening in, that they've told me they're listening in, but my Guru Jana has appeared in the form of Vaisheshika Maharaj. And I don't just mean that casually. I mean that Vaisheshika Maharaj is my Shiksha Guru. He is my Guru Jana. I take his advice in all the important decisions in my life. He's accompanied by his good wife, Nirakula Mataji, who's also my Guru Ma, and they're sitting super close to me. And so, of course, I'm excited to speak in front of you, because like a child who wants to perform in front of his parents, I'm excited about that. But I did have the thought while you were doing kirtan that if Vaisheshika Maharaj doesn't know I'm giving class, or if he does know and he slips out, that's okay too. I'm assuming I have until 9 a.m., is that correct? All right. Can we go back to text 38? Actually, let's go back to 36. Thank you. Okay. So the acharyas made note, everybody did, of this Kṛṣṇaṃ ca Rāmaṃ ca, and Krishna and Ram. So Balaram killed Dhenukāsura. Dhenukāsura kicked Balaram and then really set up to kick him a second time when he saw that Balaram was undisturbed by the first kick, and he turned away from him as donkeys do and prepared to kick him with his hind legs. And then Balaram grabbed him by his hind legs, swung him around, which killed him, threw him up in the Tāla trees, the palmyra trees, the ice apple trees that look more or less like palm trees that you would see in the West, maybe like king palm trees if you're familiar with Western palm trees. And then Dhenukāsura sat on top of the trees, broke the tree he was sitting on, that crashed and had a domino effect, crashed down many trees, many of the ice apples fell down to earth. And then the Kṛṣṇaraha, the other brayers, which could mean jackals, who also have an awful sound, but in this case, contextually, it must mean the other karas, the other asses that were accompanying, that were disturbed because hatta bandhavaha, because their friend had been killed. They abhyadravan sarve, all of them ran forward to attack. And they were gyataya, they were known to be friends of Dhenukasya, of Dhenukasur. And they were samrabdha, they were enraged. They weren't just enraged, they were completely agitated and disturbed. And they ran forward to attack Abhyadravan. It's said that they attacked and Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma. But that word cha is used twice, which is unusual or quizzical. It could be a rhythmic filler to make the verses the proper length. That's usually how it might be viewed by a grammarian or a mundane Sanskritist. But for our acharyas, they saw this double usage of cha, which really intensifies, and Kṛṣṇa, and Balarāma. It would be the equivalent of somebody saying that. They're seeing it as significant. And they give several possibilities why that might have been. One of them was that the other donkeys, demons who had taken the form of donkeys, they were intimidated by Balarāma's prowess, by his strength. And so they thought that Kṛṣṇa might be an easier target. That's from their point of view. And then from Krishna's point of view, he jumped in front of the demons and his brother because of sneha, because of prema, because of love for his brother. And then Balarāma, out of love for his younger brother, Balarāma has Sakya Bhav mixed with Vatsalya out of his friendship and also parental affection for Kṛṣṇa. You can love Kṛṣṇa up. That's dasya. He's up above you. And then you can also love Kṛṣṇa equally. Hopefully I won't get stool passed on my head. That would be a full-blown omen. You give class here many times. I give class here once in a year. And so if a stool is passed on my head, it is a definite omen. I'm a nonsense. Just as a flower garland falling is a good omen, that is a bad one. And I had that thought, actually, before class. I thought, I really hope a pigeon doesn't pass stool on my head. I'm going to have to work on my slips. It's like, all that boxing hopefully did me a favor. You can love Kṛṣṇa up. This idea of chari bhav, of 4 relationships with Kṛṣṇa, or of 5 relationships with Kṛṣṇa. Sometimes we say there's 4. Prabhupada also said that. The Chaitanya Charitamrita says that. Sometimes there's 5. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu says 5. There's a neutral one, Shanta, Rati, which is actually given by Bharat Muni in his Natya Shastras as being the highest. Shanta and Madhurya Rati show up as the 9 bhavs in the Natya Shastras of Bharat Muni. And then our 7 gona rasas are the other 7, such as anger and chivalry and fear and disgust, etc. And then we add 3 to those. We add dasya, sakya, and vatsalya, and that becomes our 5 rasas of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which then gets distilled down to 4 in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. But you can love Kṛṣṇa neutrally. You can love him, that's Shanta. You can love him up, that's dasya. You can love him equally, that's sakya. You can love him down, that's vatsalya. And you can also love him equally with a romantic element, and that is madhurya, which is why Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions the similarity between Sakya Prem and Madhurya Prem, because they're both based on an equal, intimate relationship with Krishna. That's why you have things like the Priyanarma Sakhas, who are deeply involved in the affairs of the Kunjas. And even, here's some subcategories. You can love Krishna equally, but a little bit beneath him, like a younger friend. And that's Gaurava Sakya Prem. You can love him completely as an equal. That's Vishramba Sakya Prem. And so there's a natural symmetry and geometry and logic and elegance to the way our acharyas envision and build on the work of Bharat Muni in their development of our rasa theory. Anyway, from that point of view, Balaram, filled with Vatsalya, went and stood side by side with Krishna, either to again engage with them before Krishna or to meet Krishna side by side in the battle. And of course, these aren't exclusive options. They can all be true, because one of them is from the perspective of the donkeys, the demons, that they were going to attack Krishna first. The other one is from the perspective of Krishna, and the other one is from the perspective of Balaram. And so it's easy to have all of these things be simultaneously true. That's how I read it. I would never have seen this without the Acharya's commentaries, but having seen them, I immediately appreciated that all of these things could simultaneously be true. And that's what makes rasa sweet, is that many different elements come together magically and they create a beautiful meditation and a beautiful reality within Leela. Moving forward to the next verse. Go back to, there you go, to the Sanskrit. And then stang apatata Krishna. One after another they fell upon apatata Krishna. They fell upon Krishna. Ramascha and Ram. See there, it was just one time used. That would be normal. That would be normal. Ramascha. And then Nripa, O king. Leelaya, very easily, as a Leela, very easily. Grihita, they grabbed paschat charanam. They grabbed their hind legs. Paschat, like paschatya desha tarine, delivering the Western countries. Paschat means Western, but it also means rear, because Eastern is seen as first, because the sun rises in the East, and therefore it's the first place you look, and then the back place you look is to the West. That's why also Dakshin means south as well as right, because if you're facing left, then to your right is also the south. If you're facing to the east, then your right is also the south. So paschat charanam, they grab their hind legs. That would indicate that the other demons who were in the forms of asses also turned around to kick them with their hind legs, and thus presented an easy target. And just logically speaking, if you are in a fight and you use a technique and that technique works against your opponents, and you really, defeat or weaken or hurt your opponent with a given technique that they appear to be defenseless against, or they don't know how to counter, then you just repeat the technique over and over again. Someone's rushing at you and you kick them in the leg and their leg buckles and they go, ow, and they start holding their leg. And they come at you again, you just kick their leg again. If you jab them in the face, you just jab them again. And as long as the technique is working, you just deploy it over and over and over again. And so we see that Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma didn't even have to go to phase 2. They didn't have to use fakes and counters and multi-layered attacks. They just use the same attack, like very easily. Like you rush at me and I just pick you up and throw you, and then you rush somebody else and you just pick them up and throw them, and it looks like child's play. Prahinot, and they threw them. Trina Rajasu. Trinaraj, king of the grass. Trinat Api Sunichena. Trinaraj, the king of the grass, which of course would be the name for a tree. It generally refers to coconut trees, but here, contextually, we know that it must refer to tall trees, these palm trees, and Trina Raja, so into the palm trees. They threw them all up, and then moving forward. Pala Prakara Sankirnam. With groups of fruits spread out. Daitya dehai gatasubihi. And with the bodies of the demons whose lives had departed. Their asu, it was gata, it was gone. Raraja bu satalagrayar. The earth shone with the tops of the tall trees. Ghanar Eva, like clouds. Nambas Talam, on the surface of the sky, on the horizon, on the arch of the sky, on the firmament of the sky. Like clouds decorate the sky. And then this verse is particularly beautiful. There's two kinds of alankar in verses, ornaments in verses. There's shabda alankar, ornaments of sound, also in English called alliteration, where you repeat sounds or you rhyme words. Pala prakara, both starting with pa, daitya deha, and then also a repetition of D, and then raraja, a repetition of the R, and so there's some repetition in the verse. The first two were pointed out by Mukunda Datta Prabhu yesterday. He noticed them. And I was noticing Tāla and Tāla, the tall trees and the surface. He said, yeah, that's there, but it's a little bit of a stretch. He said, I like even better Pala Prakara and Daitya Deha. Then just now when I was reading it, I noticed Raraja, where the repetition of the syllable R. So that's an indication of that's Shabda Alankar, technically called Anupras, which is alliteration. It's an ornament of sound. And then there's also Artha Alankar, which I noticed when I looked at the verse, which is, it says, Ghanayar Eva, like with clouds. Nabastalam, in the sky. And so that's upama alankar. It's an ornament or poetic of meaning. And so you've got this image which is invoked of dark clouds in the sky, and the dark clouds in the sky are simultaneously illuminated by the sun. And so they are effulgent. And they decorate the earth. The earth looks especially beautiful with dark clouds in the sky, and especially beautiful at sunset, Vishwanath Chakravarti mentions in his Tika. And then the demons' bodies were in the tall trees above the earth. The earth was decorated with the tall fruits, the ice apple fruits, which are like a kind of a gelatinous big fruit. It breaks. It says there's like kind of clear gelatinous balls inside of it. They're kind of like a lychee. And so that earth looked beautiful because all the tall fruits had fallen down. The cowherd boys did not eat them because they were contaminated with blood, but Pulindas came, the Adivasis came, and they took them. But the Paka cowherd boys could not take because they were contaminated with the blood. That's mentioned by the Acharyas in the purports. And so you get this beautiful image. So you've got these dark clouds illuminated at the time of sunset with red and various colors. And so that was the demons' dark bodies with the blood. And then the earth was already beautified by the tall fruits, and then even more so up in the sky, and it created a really beautiful image. And that would be an example of simile because of the usage of the word eva, which separates similes from the more general category of metaphors. A simile is a type of metaphor, and so that's upama. So you have, within the verse, you have both shabda alankar as well as artha alankar. This verse is particularly beautiful. It really paints an image. It's the essence of what Leela's supposed to do for the devotee. It's supposed to paint an image in their mind, in their heart, and eventually in their self. And then the last verse, tayoḥ su-mahat karma niśamya vibudha-ādayaḥ. So the enlightened beings, the demigods, Ādayaḥ, and others, niśamya, hearing this su-mahat, this very great karma activity, that tat of those two brothers, tayoḥ, mumucuḥ puṣpa-varṣāṇi, they released puṣpa-varṣāṇi, downpours or rains of flowers. That's also quite a beautiful image. Cakrur, and they performed vādyāni, tuṣṭuvuḥ, they performed music, and they also recited prayers. And so that's the verses that we treated. Hridayananda Maharaj and Gopi Pranadana Prabhu, in their last purport, they mentioned the word the nonchalant way, which I thought was a particularly clever translation of the lilaya grihita. They seized them very easily. And so I thought they picked up on that and used a really precise English word, nonchalant, which very much communicates this idea that things were done extremely easily. Well, I'm going to look at my notes because I even took notes, and that's even less likely for me. Anyway, I can say this. We're deep in the 10th canto, which is of the 10 subjects of the Bhagavatam. It is the Ashray. It is the greatest subject of the Bhagavatam. It's what everything has been leading up to. And it's also Mukara Vinda Prapula. It's described in the Padma Purana that the 10th canto is Krishna's blossoming lotus face. And Prabhupada would like to render this as it is Krishna's smiling lotus face. And I was thinking about that. And Prapula, which means blossoming, from pala, which means fruits. And so it's like especially blossoming for fruits or flowers. But because Krishna's face is the subject of what is blossoming, how does a face blossom? It blossoms with a smile. And therefore Prabhupada's extremely expert translation that the 10th canto is Mukara Vinda Dashama Prapula. It's Krishna's smiling lotus face. This chapter, and I read the whole chapter. I didn't manage to read the Acharya's commentaries to the whole chapter, but I did at least read the verses for the whole chapter. And I felt like I'd never read the chapter before. It is ridiculous how beautiful the chapter is. I could not believe how gorgeous this chapter is. It's Krishna evolves from his Kumar Lila to his Paugan Lila, and he becomes Gopal instead of Vatsapal in this chapter. When Krishna is very young, it's mentioned in this chapter that Nanda Baba would go out and herd the cows himself because he thought Krishna was too young. And out of fatherly affection, his Vatsalya Prem, he went out and with great separation left Krishna to go in the forest with the cows and the bulls. And Krishna was only Vatsapal. He was only old enough to take care of the young calves. But at this time, on Gopashtami, he became Gopal. I actually got Brahman initiation on Gopashtami in Prabhupada's Samadhi. And so I was also thinking about that some 26 years ago. And so Krishna became Gopal. And when Krishna went out in the forest with the calves didn't want to leave. And the bulls didn't even want to leave Krishna. And they all followed him. So Krishna actually ended up being Vatsapal and Gopal and taking care of the oxen and the bulls and everybody, because they all went with him. And all his cowherd friends with him as well. They went with him as well. And the bees followed them into the forest, and they were humming. And various animals also followed. And the trees that were there, they bowed down to touch Krishna's lotus feet. And Krishna engaged in this incredibly sweet Leela where he spoke to his elder brother Balarāma and said, the trees are bowing down to you. See, they're offering their respects to you. The birds are offering you prayers as they chirp, and the bees are offering you prayers as they buzz. Just see, he began to glorify Balarāma, and we see Krishna not only as the beloved of Braj, but also as the lover of Braj. Krishna is not only the Vishaya, the object of the devotee's love, but he's also the Ashray. Krishna also loves us incredibly so. And he loves Balarāma so much, as evidenced by him jumping in front of his elder brother to fight on his behalf, despite being the younger brother. Krishna couldn't contain himself. And you see this competition, not unlike Radharani and Krishna's competition, where they each glance at each other and become more beautiful, feasting their eyes upon one another without limit. You see Krishna and Balarāma in their pure love for one another, outdoing one another. Sometimes Balarāma wakes up in the night and jumps out of bed and runs out of the house, sleepwalking in a dream, because he dreams Krishna's been attacked, and he rushes to Krishna's defense. And you see here Krishna reciprocating with that by rushing to Balarāma's defense, not to be outdone. And there's a competition in which no one knows defeat. And they just continue to love each other more and more intimately. Such Sakya Prem. If you read Prabhupada, I read the chapter from the Krishna book. I'm not sure. I have to go and read the entire Krishna book to be sure. But I became stunned when I read Prabhupada's translation of this chapter, because it seemed like he was just riffing and soloing off of the Sanskrit of the verses and the commentaries, and it was something that he was well acquainted with when he spoke about these Leelas. It seemed the most natural thing I'd ever read from Srila Prabhupada. We don't have Prabhupada's translation of this chapter. He passed away just one chapter before. That's another thing. Prabhupada got up to the Brahma Vimohana Leela and left at some point in there, the chapter before, where we're cured of our idea that Krishna might be a ordinary child. Even Brahma had that deficiency of thought, and he was cured of that. And as Brahma becomes cured of thinking Krishna is an ordinary child, we also become cured. And then in this chapter, we meet the gopis who are looking at Krishna romantically, to my knowledge, for the first time in the Bhagavatam. Just after this, we find the gopis looking at Krishna with sidelong glances, and the beginning of their exchanges of romantic love. And so we see that. But we also find all the rasas here. We have the plants and the trees in Shanta, maybe even the cows in Shanta. You've got Vatsalya from Balarāma, the older cowherd boys, or even the cows who also have some Vatsalya for Krishna, depending on who you want to read. And then you've got Krishna's cowherd friends in every variation of Sakya Bhav, going up in Gaurava, coming down with a little Vatsalya, or pure Vishramba Sakya Bhav. You've got Balarāma for Vatsalya, again. You've got the gopis and their romantic love. You have every single Sthayi Bhav represented in this chapter. Krishna serves Balarāma. Balarāma lays down and uses the lap of a cowherd, and Krishna massages him. This is brought up in the Chaitanya Charitamrita for the special feature of within Nityananda Prabhu. It's like the defining feature of Balarāma, this kind of intimate service that they render to one another. Balarāma also serves Krishna. They imitate the calls of animals. You even get Govardhan and the Yamuna get mentioned as Adri and Sarit in a kind of a covered way, a very suggestive way, as the mountain and the river. It's just, and then them walking barefoot, because Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma won't wear shoes unless all of their cows have shoes. That comes up in the chapter, it's there in the Bhagavatam, and it's also the Acharyas make comment on it, that it's their dharma to walk barefoot like their cows. The intense affection that Kṛṣṇa has for his devotees. It's all there. It's like a perfect chapter. It's like a perfect chapter. I wasn't even going to mention this, but Sanak Prabhu, my elder Guru Bhai, my elder brother, in so many ways. Not just that we're initiated by the same Guru Maharaj, but also just in my life. He's been my friend, philosopher, and guide. Sanak Prabhu mentioned to me, no one said anything about the Chaitanya Shikshamrita, which I wasn't even going to mention. I just assumed everybody had also treated it. But Dhenukasur represents Stula Buddhi. We need Sukshma Buddhi. We need subtle intelligence. But Dhenuka represents... Dhenuka actually doesn't mean donkey in Sanskrit. I looked it up in a couple of dictionaries. I couldn't find it. From Dhenu, and Dhenuka is kind of a diminutive of Dhenu, and so it would be kind of like a sub-cow type entity. But in Monier Williams, at least, it was just mentioned, it was Dhenukasur was mentioned. But they mentioned Dhenukasur, but then they said he was Kara Rupa Drik. He assumed the form of Kara. Kara means rough and sharp and pointed, and it does mean a donkey because they bray in a really nasty way. And Kroshtara, which would normally mean jackal, also comes from Kṛṣṇa, which also means crying loudly. And so in this context, it also means that the asses were braying loudly and nastily. But Dhenukasur is mentioned in both Krishna Samhita and Chaitanya Shikshamrita by Bhaktivinoda Thakur as representing Stula Buddhi, or rough intelligence, gross intelligence, blunt intelligence. Sometimes it's translated as blunt judgment. But I think perhaps materialistic, unrefined discernment. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati is Shri Krishna, the Supreme Godhead, which I think might be where Prabhupada got the word Godhead and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I got to go back and really look it up to figure out the history. But there's a book by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he extends the meaning of this Stula Buddhi, this gross intelligence. Anyway, so Bhaktivinoda Thakur says in Chaitanya Shikshamrita and also in Krishna Samhita that we need to give up that unrefined discernment. And we need to give it up by our own endeavor. And then through our own endeavor, then Krishna's mercy will descend. Balaram's mercy will descend. Guru's mercy will descend. And synergistically we'll be able to give up the ignorance of our swarup, of our ultimate form in Krishna's pastimes, the ignorance about the truth of Krishna's name, how it's non-different from Krishna and gives us immediate access to Krishna, and the truth about Krishna's Nam, his Leela, and our own swarup. And through our own endeavor, and then synergistically met with grace through Krishna, Balaram, and Guru's assistance, with Balaram being the Adi Guru, we'll be able to overcome. And each one of these demons represents a different type of an anartha, a bad quality that needs to be given up. And this is a form of pratikvad, or symbolism within the Leela, that we know is justified because our acharyas make mention of it. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati extends that meaning. And he says that Dhenuka could not taste the tal fruits because they were high up. And because he could not taste them, he did not want anybody else to taste them. And this is like the Vaidhi Bhaktas who are overly attached to ritual and they cannot give up their attachment to ritual, and they do not understand the spontaneous love of the residents of Vrindavan and the Vaishnavas. And so he extends the meaning of sukshma and stula buddhi to also be about ritual versus spontaneity, or vaidhi versus rag. And that they try to hold back and decry not only those Vaishnavas but also the texts. And they don't want to give access to those texts and those truths so people can evolve into a spontaneous, intimate, loving, love-laden relationship with the Supreme. I thought that was a particularly beautiful extrapolation and commentary on Bhaktivinoda Thakur's already unbelievably beautiful commentary. And it's like the same thing, Raja, just as the earth shines, and the sky shine, that these Leela shines with their commentaries more and more beautifully. Oh my gosh, come on. I had to go through all these verses, so I lost half my class. All right, well, I'll just say this. We can note that the tayoḥ boys did not jump in. Maybe they would have, I don't know. But we don't find they jumped in. Somehow or other they stayed back. And they had this goptritve varanam tata and this rakshishiti. What is it? Bishwas. They had this bishwas, this faith, that rakshishati, he will protect. Rakshishiti, he will protect me. Goptritve varanam, and he will maintain me. In the matter of maintenance, they accept that Krishna will maintain them, both positively and negatively. This is really the essence of Vaishnavism. We can learn from this Leela that Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma will ultimately step in a miraculous, earth-shatteringly beautiful and easy way and help us in our lives and help us to attain our goal of prema. They do so in the Leela, they do so in the lives of the Vaishnavas. We need to say Tavasmiti, we need to say I am yours. Actually, Manu, in his Manavadharma Shastra, says that that is the synonym. It's the term used for military surrender. You are not allowed to attack someone that says Tavasmiti. If they say I am yours, you can't attack them. That is the term used for military surrender in Manu. It's the exact same term used by the Sri Sampradaya in their definition of Sharanagati. It's the exact same term used in our Shastras, in both in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and the Hari Bhakti Vilas, to epitomize and gloss what is meant by Sharanagati, surrender to Krishna. We need to surrender. We need to let Krishna help us. We do our part. We let Krishna help us. And he does so. And every devotee, with even a reasonable degree of surrender, they have experience over and over again that Krishna steps into their lives and saves them. Every Vaishnava has this experience of Krishna embracing them and picking them up in miraculous ways that they never could have done on their own. And so in the same way that this Leela is there, and Krishna so easily, and Balarāma so easily helps us, they'll also help us, but we have to do our part. We have to stop taking shelter of Maya, and we have to turn towards Krishna and become Krishna unmukha so his magic can be worked. I mean, I got so much more to say. I think I just need to give up. I mean, I'm about, I'd say 2/3 of the way through my class, and all the big stuff's like coming up, but I think I'm out of time. Unless, is that it?
You have some questions.
All right, I'm done. Let's get some questions.
Hare Krishna. One small announcement. After that, you can ask your question. So, starting from today and every day, at the end of the class, we will distribute coupon for free breakfast prasad. This is for today and every day. and I will be sitting under the tamar tree. You can come there after the question answer and you can collect your coupon today and every day. Hare Krishna.
Your class got everyone hungry for Kṛṣṇa. You mentioned that chapter you read was like almost perfect. Sometimes we find when reading Śrīmad Bhagavatam a list of names of ancestry, of this emperor, this child, that child. But they say that the Bhagavatam is sweet in every aspect. Of course, the 10th canto is particularly intimate with Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma. So how should we view that? Should we just go to the 10th canto and although it's all sweet, but it seems like it's sweeter as you go to the more intimate pastimes?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. There is a sense, Bhakti-Vinod Thakur makes mention of this also in the Krishna Samhita, that there are sections of the Bhagavatam which are more vyavaharic and more paramarthik, more supremely beneficial and more worldly. And so we don't find our acharyas spending quite as much time commentating on the list of names of kings. So I think it's appropriate that devotees give a little more focus to these sweeter sections, especially as they move forward in their spiritual lives, and they will relish them more. And that'll be natural, and that's apropos. Let me finish. And even we find Raghunath Das Goswami saying he doesn't want to listen to descriptions of Vaikuntha. And we find devotees don't want to set one's foot out of Vrindavan, or at least they want to live here forever. And there is a place for that. However, that will generally take place after a devotee makes a systematic study of the Bhagavatam and goes through everything beautifully. It goes through everything systematically and appropriately. They become purified and they gradually move up to Krishna's lotus feet by starting their meditation on Krishna's lotus feet, the first 2 cantos, and his legs, the 3rd and 4th cantos, and his waist, and his chest, and his arms, and his neck, and eventually his face. And so we also find that we are instructed very sternly to do that carefully. And of course, the Bhagavatam itself is meant to be read systematically. That's why it's got 335 chapters and 12 cantos. And so it itself is a conversation that took place over 7 days. So just based on the structure of the Bhagavatam, as well as by the warnings of our acharyas, we should make a systematic study. And then within that, as we get further and further, we can have a little bit of a special appreciation, not even just for the 10th canto, but for specific sections, specific devotees. Srila Prabhupada himself mentions, if you want to love Krishna in Vatsalya Prem, you need to meditate on the verse about Yashoda with her saffron yellow sari. This is 10.9.3. And you should always think of it and always remember it. It's actually one of the things I wanted to mention, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Try and work in the rest of my class in here. Anyone who desires to be in Krishna conscious, in motherly affection or parental affection, should contemplate the bodily features of Mother Yashoda. How she was dressed, how she was working and perspiring, how beautifully the flowers were arranged in her hair, and so on. Once you take advantage of the full description provided here by thinking of Mother Yashoda in maternal affection for Krishna. And so that's Prabhupada's purport. And so there is a special place for those things, as well as a systematic study. Thank you for making that point. Yes.
Thank you for keeping yourself 365 days a year, 166 on the years, fully absorbed in hearing Śrīmad Bhagavatam, teaching to others, so that you can paint a picture for all of us from these verses that's indelible, that stays in our minds. It was an extremely moving class, just having you paint the whole picture. And thank you. There's not many in the world who stay so absorbed in the Shastra and live the life of the Shastra by helping so many others. And I'm deeply grateful. We're all deeply grateful for what you're doing. Thank you very much for a life-changing class. Hare Krishna.
As you always say, right back at you, Maharaj. I am going to say this, though. You gave me a moment, because I get to comment on what you said. So I'm just going to go ex-tempo for a second and say something I wasn't sure I was going to say, but it was definitely in my mind to say it. I'm just going to go real quick. I bring people to Vrindavan, people who know nothing about Krishna, and people who know stuff about Krishna, all, doors open to all. I'm like a bit of a professional tier 2 guru. Maybe I'll go to hell for that. I don't know. We'll figure it out later. But I do bring people to Vrindavan. And one of the things I do is I try to get people to where they can appreciate Krishna Lila in 3 or 4 days. We come to Vrindavan for less than a week. I don't want them to get too comfortable in this most sacred of places. And so I usually wait until they get here. I talk about all things but Krishna. And then when we get to Vrindavan, after going to the Himalayas and wherever else we go, we went to Jaipur this time, we try to move them from A to Z, from noticing that you are not merely a physical being, to Krishna's Leelas in 3 or 4 days. And here's what that looks like in 2 minutes. We start with the idea that we are conscious beings, and if you don't want to take shelter of a revelation, which automatically means everybody else gets to take shelter of their revelation, and you have a double-edged sword where you can't postulate why your revelation is better. If you want to actually do something logical, which is going to be persuasive, and convince people of the legitimacy or the astuteness of your tradition, vis-a-vis another tradition, you got to start with what they can see. What can we see? We can see our consciousness. Our consciousness possesses features like free will and the ability to think about other things we don't find in the chemical world, and therefore we can say that consciousness is irreducible, a basic quantum feature of reality. Accepting that, the singularity, because we see the universe is moving outwards like this. You can study that in astrophysics. It's well demonstrated. And therefore, starting from a singularity, a central point, you now have a singularity which must possess consciousness as it's also a basic irreducible feature of reality. A conscious, irreducible feature of reality is also known as God. Now you have a conscious reality. You can further look at yourself and notice that human beings are special. They're special in that they can think deeply about the nature of the world. They have recursion in their language, which allows them to unlimitedly stack one idea on top of another, something you don't find in animals. They can think about the nature of the absolute, and even more so, because of their incredibly developed consciousness, they have the ability to love profoundly and selflessly. Something that instinct does not afford. That's what we were put on this earth to do. That propensity must also come from the divine. Now you have a divine which is not only unlimitedly powerful because it gave rise to the universe, and also conscious, but it's also capable of incredible love. And for us to fulfill that potential and fall in love with that conscious reality, that conscious source of all existence, we have to envision God as being human-like, because you can't fall in love intimately with an animal. And intimate love trumps formal love. Therefore, we must love Krishna as a human, and that's why we have deities that look human-like. But that would be why we need to love Krishna as a human. That doesn't necessarily mean that Krishna is human. However, an all-good and all-powerful deity would naturally create a universe where the most developed species that could fall in love with him actually had the possibility of really falling in love with him and not just fake falling in love with him. And therefore, we must be divine-like enough. We must be theomorphic enough that we can fall in love with that supreme deity, which therefore must actually be human-like, or rather speaking, we're divine-like, and that's Krishna. Lovable, embraceable. And we envision God subversively as being a child, so our love will flow spontaneously. We envision God as black, as beautiful, as feminine. In Vrindavan, a place where we can forget Krishna's divinity, because we even have to forget Krishna's God ultimately in order to madly fall in love with him, because that power differential and natural hegemony would attenuate or cripple our love otherwise, and therefore we must forget Krishna's God. There must be a place where we can do that. That place is Vrindavan, and in fact Krishna himself must forget his own divinity in order to fall in love with us, because Krishna is above all things a lover, and that's why derivatively we also have that capability. And in addition to being unlimitedly powerful, Krishna is also unlimitedly sweet, and that necessitates his forgetting his own divinity. Vrindavan is a place where such magic occurs. The deities are an attempt to inculcate these ideals into your daily life, and that is the necessity of Leela. We have to have these sacred narrations where we can forget ourselves and disport ourselves on equal terms and fall in love with Krishna. And when we accept the natural humanity without any deficiencies, and the natural form of the Absolute without any deficiencies like being subject to entropy, but with all the benefits like being able to cultivate intimate love, then we also have to appreciate the beauty of poetry and the beauty of sacred narration and leelas. Because if you really want to understand love, you don't just read books on neurologies, you read Shakespeare. And that is why the Bhagavatam, above all things, is poetic. And that's why the most important thing when we're looking at these leelas is to notice the picture they allow us to paint, because that picture allows us to transport ourselves to that world. And we begin by Nam Smarana, and then Rupa Smarana, and then Guna Smarana, and then eventually Leela Smarana, again sequentially moving up through the ladder until eventually we can go to that place and find out that that place is even this place, and that not only is the deity for practice, the deity is also Sadhya Tattva as well as Sadhana Tattva. It's also there in perfection. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanande.